Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Beth Sibilia, and I'm the director of the Center for Housing Opportunity Eastern Connecticut, or CHOEC. We're grateful that you've taken time to be part of this conversation. Joining me from our team are Nicole McCormack, project manager, who keeps us moving forward, Caroline Wells, our regional land use planner, who leads our technical assistance program, and the newest member of our team, Kathleen Kreider, senior project manager, who will work to expand our efforts in the Northeast corner. The Center for Housing Opportunity in Eastern Connecticut is a partnership among 7 organizations: the Housing Collective, the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut, LIST Connecticut, the Partnership for Strong Communities, United Way of Southeastern Connecticut, Connecticut College, and Eastern Connecticut State University. CHOEC's mission is to align a diverse coalition of practitioners, policymakers, residents, and community organizations to collectively identify and build upon community-driven and data-informed solutions that preserve, protect, and produce safe and affordable housing for all. We believe that equitable access to housing that is safe, affordable, and connected to resources is a human right and a critical piece of infrastructure for a thriving region. We envision a future where every resident of Eastern Connecticut, regardless of income, race, or ethnicity, has access to a safe and affordable home as the foundation to pursue their goals, achieve their dreams, and sustain a stable, fulfilling, and healthy life. 2 weeks ago, we began a conversation about the housing challenges and changes that are playing out in real time across Eastern Connecticut. In our small towns and cities, households are changing. More people are living alone. Young families are trying to put down roots. Longtime residents want to stay in the communities they've built their lives in. But the housing options in many of our towns haven't kept pace with those realities. Tonight is about that conversation and taking it one step further. Because across Eastern Connecticut, this isn't theoretical anymore. It's showing up in very real ways. Employers are struggling to attract and retain workers. Families are making difficult choices about whether they can stay. And communities are being asked to balance growth, affordability, and the character that makes each town feel like home. So the questions we raised last week still stand, but they do become more urgent. How do we support the people who are already part of our communities today? How do we create pathways for people to stay as their lives change? And how do we, in that way that respects and preserves what people value most, meet the needs where they live? At CHOEC, our role is to help communities move from questions to action. We work across Eastern Connecticut to bring together local leaders, residents, and partners to ground these conversations in real information and to support practical, community-driven solutions. But the most important thing we can do is make sure that the right voices are shaping that path forward. That's why we've brought together speakers tonight who are doing this work every day, who understand the challenges, but also knows what it takes to move communities forward in real and practical ways. 2 weeks ago, Don Poland of Goman in York discussed changing demographics and housing demands. And Jamie Parker, the Eastern Coordinated Access Network project manager at TVCCA, addressed the homeless response system and the acute need for housing. We have asked Jamie and Don to join us for the Q&A at the end of this discussion this evening. Don, unfortunately, is unable to join us tonight due to a planning and zoning meeting. Caroline Wells of our team will be joining us at the end to moderate questions, and we will take those questions from the audience in the Q&A box. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce our speakers tonight, Delia Fay and Dwight Merriman, leaders who are working at the intersection of policy, planning, and real-world implementation. I'm going to introduce Dwight first, who will be speaking last. Dwight Merriman, a lawyer and land use planner, is a fellow in the American College of Real Estate Lawyers, a fellow and past president of the American Institute of Certified Planners, past chair of the American Bar Association section of state and local government law, a counselor of real estate, and the Connecticut member of Owners Council of America. Dwight taught for 40 years as an adjunct professor in several law schools. He has published over 200 articles and 13 books, including co-authoring the casebook Planning and Control of Land Development and co-authoring the treatise Rathcott's Law of Zoning and Planning with Professor Sarah Bronin. He is the author of Connecticut Land Use Law and Practice, 4th edition. Dwight is an active duty and reserve surface warfare officer in the U.S. Navy, and it included 3 Vietnam deployments. He retired after 31 years as a captain. He graduated from the University of Massachusetts, has his master's degree of regional planning from the University of North Carolina, and has his law degree from Yale University. Delia Fay is an AICP certified planner and is the senior regional planner for the Northeastern Connecticut Council of Governments. With over 23 years of experience in municipal planning in Northeastern Connecticut, Delia has served as town planner, ZEO, and wetlands agent in Northeastern towns. She has written regulations, plans of conservation and development, and affordable housing plans for numerous towns and has reviewed many hundreds of development proposals. Having worked as the Woodstock town planner for 19 years, she developed a passion for how underappreciated zoning is in most communities, despite its tremendous influence on whether towns thrive or not. And with that, I welcome Delia.
Thank you, Beth. So we're going to take a poll. We'd like to hear from you. When you think of home, what matters most to you? Please select all that apply. So the options are feeling comfortable and safe, being close to the people I care about, having my own space and privacy, being near work, school, or daily needs, and feeling connected to a community. We'd love to hear from you. So we can see the results here. We have 81%. That's the highest ranking question, to feel comfortable and safe. The next highest would be a tie between having my own space and privacy and feeling connected to a community, followed by being near work, school, or daily needs. And that as well is tied with being close to people I care about. So next slide. So we have a challenge. And if you're in land use as a job or you're a commission, you're probably hearing about this all the time in the news. We need more housing, including more affordable housing. So the big question is, how do we get them? Well, to do that, we need existing and new landlords and developers to build more housing units. We need land to put it on and existing buildings to convert to, existing non-residential buildings to convert to housing. We need the financing and we need the regulations that allow residential uses. And depending on your background, you might think the one that you're most familiar with is the most important, but actually, if any one of those don't come together, your project's not going to happen. And the turnover of existing housing units or rental units to a new landlord does not yield additional units. So even though they may turn over, that's not going to help increase the numbers. Next slide. So my background is in land use planning, so that's what I'm going to focus on. But certainly we need to have more discussions about with the other 3 factors of housing in order to move the needle. Next slide. So when we look at these factors and what we need to have new housing, we have to ask, can they create more units? Well, the answer is really yes and no. Next slide. It depends on several factors. It's not just people, land, and money. It's possible, but it's not simple. And every town, we have 169 towns in Connecticut, and they're all different. They all have their own set of regulations. So for each application, the commission has to review, does the land support the proposal? You have to look at whether it's on sewer versus septic. There's wetlands, which is obviously a different land use commission, but it's still a concern. You look at whether it's in compliance with the zoning, the standards, the lot sizes, setbacks, all the too many standards to go over right now in the permitting process. And what are the obstacles? So some of the things we've mentioned would be considered obstacles. And it's rather complicated, as we all know. Next slide. So in order to provide towns, and this was primarily designed for the towns in the NECOG region, but it's really available, and invite everyone to review it. The housing regulation updates, a guide for vibrant communities. It's a document that I wrote for our comprehensive economic development strategy for NECOG, which is nearly complete. This guide is meant to help towns identify opportunities in land use to benefit your community, where it can help you increase housing variety allowed by the regulations. You can help you consider where to reuse or redevelop land, convert existing structures to housing that may be underutilized or abandoned, renew regulations to increase vibrancy in your town. Next slide. To have a vibrant community, we need a balance of housing and jobs, conservation and development, and residents of all ages. Even though in land use, we tend to talk about one thing at a time, we tend to talk about conservation. That's what we were talking about when I started as a planner 20 something years ago. And sometimes we talk about workforce development, but the pendulum tends to swing in one direction at a time. And now we're pretty much focusing all on housing, which sometimes makes me feel like we're going to undo some of our progress in the previous effort, which to me is an unbalanced approach. But this evening, we're focusing on housing, but in general, we need to be looking at all of it together to have a balanced community. Next slide. So you may have seen this image before. It's from the Missing Middle Housing book by Daniel Perelik. Next slide. So most of the housing in the NECOG region is single family, and it may be that way in your town as well. Next slide. So, however, many of these housing options still exist in our communities. Many of these are the beautiful historic houses we see and recognize today as contributing to our community character, but they're not allowed anymore. Next slide. However, if you have a greater variety in housing, you'll increase options for many more households. A greater variety will have greater range of prices. With more housing options, you'll have more financially attainable housing for more people. Next slide. Here's another poll. So the question is, what sort of housing have you lived in throughout your life? So that's not just what you're living in now, but think throughout your entire life. Please choose as many that apply to the housing that you have lived in. If you could, can you scroll the things on the screen? We can see all the questions. So poll 2 has what sort of housing have you lived in throughout your life? And there's several options there. I myself have lived in at least 7 different kinds of housing on that list. So we'd love to hear from you. We'll just take another minute. So here we have the highest, and it comes as no surprise, really. 90% have lived in a single family home owned by you or someone in your household. And they're not ranked in order, but we have single family homes rented at 40%. Let's see, 3 to 4 unit building on one lot, 35%. Apartment building of 5 or more units, 55%. Condominium, 20%. Duplex or 2 family home, 30%. And rent a room in someone else's home at 10%. And there's more options if you could slide down so we could see the bottom results. If you could move the slide bar down.
Sorry, Delia is down.
Oh,
It is senior housing was 0%. So towards the bottom, college dormitory was 45%, and then mobile home 5%.
so I think that kind of shows you we have 36 people in attendance tonight, and that shows you the wide range of housing that we've all lived in throughout all of our lives. And so I think that goes to show you the kind of housing that people in your community may need, because at any given time, there are going to be people who live in your community that are in the different life stages that we've already had, or the life stages that I hope to get to if I'm lucky enough to live longer. So it just goes to show you there's a wide range of housing that we all need at different times in our lives. So next slide. When you think of missing middle housing, I'd really like you to think, and we're going to get back to this after the next question. So before tonight, were you familiar with missing middle housing in terms of duplexes or small multifamily ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units? Would like to hear how familiar you were with those. So the options are very familiar, somewhat familiar, or unfamiliar. So you have 60% being very familiar, 25% being somewhat familiar, and 15% is not familiar at all. Well, it's good to know where we are in this discussion of housing. Next slide. So when you're thinking of middle housing, who do you think lives in these types of houses? You have first-time householders, and by that I mean the folks that are maybe in their 20s, the first time they're moving out into their own independent home outside of their family home with their parents. You have single parents, single adults, families, empty nesters, retirees, multi-generational households. Those may be the grandparents with their adult children and the grandchildren, or sometimes it's the grandparents raising the grandchildren. You have the widows and widowers, people with disabilities, income limited folks, or someone like you and me. Next slide. So these are kinds of things that are discussed in the guide, but really it's an important question to ask. Which members of your community potentially have to leave town when their life circumstances change? So if you have seniors who are downsizing, but they have no smaller or more suitable options to move into, empty nesters who no longer need or want a large home that is expensive and time consuming to maintain. Maybe they'd rather spend their time or money traveling or something like that. You have young adults moving into their first home as an adult, and it could be you, it could be me. Next slide. So you have newly single adults or single parents. You have someone who may have experienced life-altering health challenges or an accident affecting their mobility, which may mean that their existing home no longer serves them. If they can't do stairs anymore, maybe if they can't manage in the kitchen or the bathroom, their existing home may not work for them. And you have people facing financial challenges such as from a job loss. So it could be you, it could be someone you know, your neighbor, your relative, or a friend. Next slide. So we have another poll here. Have you or someone close to you ever struggled to find housing that fit your life stage? This is a single choice poll, and the options are yes, personally, yes, someone close to me, not yet, but I worry about it, or no. So the results show you at the highest 40% yes, someone close to me, 30% for yes personally, 20% for no, and 10% not yet, but I worry about it. So the results of that poll really show why we're talking about this evening. So when you hear about multifamily housing, what comes to mind? Next slide. This is an example, a real example from Bristol, Connecticut. You can see Those little brown images, those are the houses, and the gray is the roads or the parking lots and the pavement. So you have two residential lots, the R10 and R15, and you have one multifamily zone, the Zone A. It's just under 14 acres with 247 units. So that's an average 18 units per acre. Next, advance it. So why might this be controversial? I'm thinking that if this was proposed new in northeastern Connecticut, it may be controversial, and I'm thinking because of the stark contrast, the buildings are so much bigger, and you can't tell from this map, but they're really quite tall. And I forgot to include how high they are, but they're quite tall. And the parking lots are way larger than any of the driveways of any of the houses nearby. I would anticipate there to be concerns about traffic and other concerns if there were to be a new development like this in northeastern Connecticut. Now, Bristol is not like the towns in northeastern Connecticut, but this was the best example I could show in an image to show a development that's very different from the surrounding neighborhood. Next slide. So here's a mix of housing types that I think works well. It's in Putnam, Connecticut. I'm familiar with it because I used to live in the two-family in the little purple lot. You can see in just about the middle of the image. So you have 5 different housing types in this small stretch of road. However, there's no glaring differences. It's all in one neighborhood, and I think that it works because of the scale. The multifamily does not dwarf the nearby buildings. There's no sea of asphalt, and there's also some large single-family homes mixed in there that are roughly comparable in size to the multifamily. So I think the mix of houses seem to work well here. So next slide. So it's interesting when you look at housing and you think of what kind of house did you grow up in? And many of us may have grown up in a very small house. And according to this image from the National Association of Home Builders, in 1950, the average square footage of new single-family homes was 983 square feet, where in 2017, that was 2,571. That's about 2.6 times as large. However, the number of people living in the home has decreased while the housing size has gone up. So do we really need more than 3 times as much living space per person as we did in 1950? Can we afford to buy or rent or heat or cool and care for such large homes? Many families are struggling to answer that question. So today's smaller households often don't need the parlor, the extra bedroom, the multiple full bathrooms, or the separate TV room or the dining room. And so if you build new housing that doesn't have those things, you're not eliminating or taking away something that you need because you didn't need it, or you don't use it. So that's where you can bring in some savings. Next slide. So you don't need as much land as you think. A smaller housing units in the same building may take up the same footprint as a typical McMansion. And in Connecticut, septic systems are based on the number of bedrooms. So the septic system would have to get larger if you had many bedrooms, but still, if you had, say 4 large houses, you're going to have the equal amount of septic systems to serve the 4 houses of, say they have 4 bedrooms each. That's 16 bedrooms. If you had 16 bedrooms within your multifamily and whatever configuration of housing units that you want, you'd have the same size septic system. And your savings can come partly in smaller size and shared amenities, where if you share the same lot, you share the same common space, you built one driveway, you share the same well, you share a roof. These are some ways that can bring the cost per unit down. And being close to the places that you frequent can shorten your commute and save you money. Next slide. It's an important question every municipality should ask is what zoning changes would promote vibrancy in your community? And the towns can refer back to that guide to review your regulations for the obstacles to vibrancy, such as if you have little diversity allowed in your new housing. Like you can't really be surprised that you have only single family homes if that's the only thing your zoning allows. And if you require a commission review when it's a permitted use, you can delegate that to staff. And when you free up time for your commission, you can allow more time for your commission to do more planning to address some of these issues. So lots of public water and sewer can accommodate multifamily in the same footprint as a modern single-family house, because again, the modern single-family home is typically so large. Next slide. So what's a great fit for your community? The guide is not meant to imply that every town should do every housing type. It's meant to help you look at all the different housing types and your neighborhoods and your zones and figure out what might fit within the ones that you already have. If you're a small town with no sewer, maybe ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units, and duplex, maybe that's what you feel fits with your town. But maybe 3 or 4 families could fit as well. And if you have sewers, maybe you can expand them. You can allow encouraging people to share homes, which doesn't involve changing the homes that you already have. You're just allowing people to share the home, which is probably already happening anyway, under the radar. You can reuse large empty buildings before they fall down. Could be a strip mall, it could be a factory, it could be a big box store that's empty now because many of them are going out of business. And you can allow for mixed uses, and that would be a residential use and a business on the same lot or within the same building. And you can redevelop brownfields and gray fields. And these are options that towns can consider. By no means am I saying that one town should do all of them, but this is giving you ideas on what you could do in your town that would work for you. Next slide. So you should consider the good and how you can multiply it. New local residents can increase the customers and employees for local businesses, helping them to be more sustainable and more successful. More residents are more feet on the street. Some more potential volunteers in the community to staff your boards and commissions and your sports teams and your volunteer services that are provided to the community. You have more taxpayers to share the burden for all the property owners. More people increases your vibrancy, and becomes an opposite of a ghost town, which is what we're trying to avoid. If you increase vibrancy, you're allowing your community to thrive. And that's what I think we're all trying to do with our planning and zoning commissions, I think. Next slide. But to be fair, we need to consider the bad and how you can address it. Many negative impacts, and that's what you often hear about at a commission meeting, the noise, the environmental impact, the traffic. Most of those likely occurred during the construction phase. With the good design, professional review, and monitoring and best management practices, you can minimize those impacts and limit to the short term of construction. Next slide. I think we have another poll. So what concerns do you hear most about new housing in your community? It's a single choice. And the options are traffic and parking, too big or out of character, environmental impacts, school crowding, or I don't hear major concerns. Just another minute. So it's fairly nearly balanced. We have 32% at too big or out of character, 23% for 3 options, traffic and parking, environmental impacts, and school crowding, and 0 people said I don't hear major concerns. So zoning has an incredible influence over how community changes over time or how it doesn't change because all the development must conform to the land use regulations. And that's why I think it's so overlooked. And maybe it's overlooked because the meetings are at night and they're long. I'm not sure if that's why it doesn't get enough attention, but zoning and the Planning and Zoning Commission has a tremendous influence over the future of your community. Next slide. So this is from one of the sources that are included in the guide. It's from the AARP Livable Communities, and they have a handbook for improved neighborhoods. They ask some interesting questions. So why are so few cities, towns, and neighborhoods in the United States walkable? Why is it so difficult to find vibrant communities where people of all ages, incomes, and backgrounds can live, work, shop, and play? And the answer in many locations is that zoning codes and land use ordinances have made the creation of such places illegal. So I think that's important. When your town's zoning no longer serves your community's best interests, what do you do? And that's why I think you need to free up time in your commission so that you can answer these important planning. This is the important work of the Planning and Zoning Commission. If you have no time because you're reviewing applications, you may need to have another meeting, or you may need to figure out how to make time so that you can actually do the planning. Next slide. So I'm suggesting that how you make these changes before you set out to cut and paste your way to new regulations, you plan before you zone. Next slide. And planning before you zone, by that I mean stop Google quilting. We're not Google cowboys where we're going to go out and find sections of regulations from random towns and bring them back and put them together and assume it'll work. Every town is not interchangeable. If you have a farming town and a coastal town and a college town, a tourist town, manufacturing town, a bedroom community, the regulations aren't not going to be interchangeable. They may not work in your town, even though they worked well in the original town they came from. So I'm suggesting that instead of doing that, the first step should be where you look at what's your problem in the town that you're trying to address, or what's the opportunity you'd like to facilitate. And when you have that guidance, then you can look at what another town has done. But before you just borrow it, don't just borrow their language and their regulations. You take some steps back and you reach out to the town to find out, why did they have that regulation? Why did they amend their regulations to add it? Did they have any problems they were trying to address? Because maybe you don't have the same problems. Maybe they regret it. What lessons have they learned? Let's not adopt someone else's problems. So I think we can adopt this approach to really help us with our housing moving forward.
Okay, and Delia, I really enjoyed your remarks. I mean, you're talking about house size. I grew up 1940s when my parents built the house, World War II Cape, 768 square feet. 6 kids eventually, but not all at once, thank goodness. On a lot that was 6 or 7,000 square feet in a suburb of Boston, Needham, a town where my family could not live today. My family as a child, because my father was a house painter. My mother was a stay-at-home who didn't go to high school, but took care of the household. You talk about 6 or 7,000 square foot lots today and 768 square. My house is now the size of an ADU, right? And so I found that the cost of a house today, controlled for inflation, is 2.4 times what it was in 1950. Because, like you said, it was like 2.6 times as large. So people are consuming more houses. We need to figure out how to consume maybe a little less house on less land, a little smaller size. It's more complicated than that, of course, and that's what I want to get into next. And your last comment, Delia, I want to highlight that. Don't just plug in somebody else's regulation. Every regulation that I've written for a community, I can't fully recommend to somebody else because it reflects a number of political compromises, but also what's unique to each and every town. So you have to customize it for every town. And looking at the people who are registered here for tonight, who collectively have an enormous body of experience, and I hope they'll join us in the last half hour for some discussion about what they've learned with regard to promoting a variety of inclusive and affordable housing types. But they know better than anyone that each of our regulations and the way towns address these issues are unique to that community. And before I go on, I want to thank Northeastern Connecticut Council of Governments, the Center for Housing Opportunity, Eastern Connecticut, and the Thames Valley Council for Community Action for bringing this session forward. You've all done a great job, and I'm very happy to have been a part of it and come along for the ride. So let's go to the next slide. There are 3 things I want you all to take away with you tonight, and this is one of them. Vocabulary. Memory experts tell us we cannot remember something unless we have a vocabulary for it. The idea that babies can remember being born is not true. They may remember sensations, but they can't form memories without words. And we can't do our job as planners, and we're all planners. I look at the list of people on joining us tonight. We're all planners in one way or another. We can't do our job without a vocabulary of knowing what's possible. Now, some people think there's 100 words that Inuits have for snow. There's not, but there are. Let's go to the next slide. We'll look at a list. Here's the 27 words that Inuits use for snow. I'm an avid skier. I actually probably see more types of snow than most of you just shoveling it. This time of year, snow changes dramatically with the weather. And I see it, I feel it. I know how it's different, and we have words for it as skiers. But look at this, all the different ways snow is central to their culture. So they can see something that we can't see. Let's go to the next slide. And as we start to talk about planning and zoning tools, let me give you the two other things I want you to take away. Besides the need for vocabulary, and my job here now for the next 20 minutes is to help expand our vocabulary about what's possible. The second takeaway is we cannot depend on the federal and state governments to solve our local problems with regard to inclusive housing and affordable housing. The president signed a couple of executive orders recently. There's a major piece of legislation, maybe the biggest in the last 20 or 30 years, making its way through Congress, but all those things take more time than we have. So think locally. There is so much that each and every one of us can do at our local boards and commissions. We don't have to have the state tell us, and we don't have to wait for the federal government to give us more tools to work with in order to make real change at the local level. The third takeaway is please remember what our role is as planners. We're all planners. We're talking about planning here tonight. The two things that strike me as someone that's been in this field for half a century now is that planning works best in times of market failure. And I have never in my career seen a more serious situation than we have with affordable housing that we have today. The market has failed us. We need to plan. We need to regulate. We need to intervene. We can't let the private market continue as it is because it's not producing what we need. And the second thing is we have time horizons as planners that are much longer than everybody else. Everybody else wants to see profit next month or next year, but not beyond that. We have to protect aquifers, ridge tops, and historic resources. And we also have to do something that no one else does except us. Those on these panels tonight and 2 weeks ago, and those of you who've registered and are here tonight. And that is to give voice to people who have no voice. Remember that. We are involved in timeframes and perspectives and interventions in market failure that no one else is and can't be solved by the private economy. And we're the ones that give voice to people who have no voice. People who don't live in our communities that want to live there, deserve the right to live there. People who want to stay on that are forced out by the lack of housing, and generations not yet born. So now let's talk about the vocabulary part of this. These are just a few ideas that come to mind first to me as tools we can use. And the other thing that you have to remember is that no single tool is going to solve your problem. You need to orchestrate. I mean, a symphony played by just one oboe is no symphony. You need a whole orchestra. And what you need to do when you hear the 50 or so ideas that I'm going to leave with you is pick and choose and add and subtract and nest on top and within each other these different things. Inclusionary zoning, my first book in 1984 was called Inclusionary Zoning Moves Downtown. And we're struggling with now. Challenges are ongoing in Cambridge, Mass. and Denver, Colorado, to find that their inclusionary zoning programs are violative of the Constitution as an unreasonable exaction. But we need to think about using that. Density bonuses, had them forever, they're still good. ADUs, very important, but they're not being built for a host of reasons we can talk about. As Delia pointed out, reducing minimum lot sizes can have a tremendous impact. You can do that with your planning and zoning commissions. You don't need the state to tell you or the federal government. You can do all these things right here. Form-based codes are not a magic wand for us, but they can be helpful. Let's look at the next slide. All right, so here's some examples, and Delia touched on these. You know, what happens with a mix, and on the lower left, you see a range of housing densities and up above an ADU. Next slide. So here's some more transit-oriented development. We have a good program at the state level to encourage that, but again, you can do it locally. Changing densities, increasing densities, allowing more clustered development, something that I studied in planning school before I went to law school back in the early 1970s. And we're still not making full use of that flexibility. And overlay districts, I have a matter that I'm working on for a developer, a for-profit developer building affordable housing, not 830G, a dedicated interested citizen. He's not a professional developer, but in Kent, who thought there was a real need for affordable housing. And with Glenn Charlder's work and Mike Ziska, a special development district, which is a kind of overlay zone, was created in order to enable him to go forward and produce market rate housing with some affordable units. And that's going to an initial hearing on Monday. You can do it at the local level without the state pushing us to do it. And that's a good example. Follow what's going on in Kent, because I think it's really a perfect example of what can be done when the community is supportive of it. They know they need affordable housing in a pricey place like Kent. And now they're going to get it, I think, because they changed the zoning to allow it. Let me step aside for a minute and say, do not fear making changes that encourage development, because when you plan for it, you can cap it. If you're afraid you might be overrun by ADUs or higher density this or whatever you do, you can cap the number of units that are allowed under that till you feel your way through as to how many you're going to have and has it reached the community's need. Next slide. And here's some example of a highly clustered development, one on the Cape, very successful. Next slide. Oh, we have a poll. All right. So what do you think works best? ADUs, inclusionary zoning, smaller lots, more density, overlay districts, or special development districts? You don't know. All right. We got about 20 weigh in last time. I want to get that number bigger. Let's see if we can have 25 of you jump in here and give us some answers. This is a low budget webinar, so we don't have music while we're waiting for the results. Delia, you want to hum a tune or something? All right. Results? Yeah, this is really interesting. Look at that. This is what's happening. We're not getting ADUs built. And I could go on for a half hour as to why that's the case and what we could do to make it better. But inclusionary zoning, again, there's room for that. Smaller lots, increased density. Absolutely. Easily done. Couple it with a flexible development approach, and you give the developer the opportunity to vary setback side yards, lot coverage and height and so forth. That can save money. Overlay districts, and not sure, maybe you'll all be more sure when we get through the next one. So let's go to the next slide. Now, remember, it's not just, Delia said, pointed out at the end that zoning is important, absolutely, but it's not just zoning. The low-income housing tax credit program can help. It's reaching the end of some of its expiration, and that's going to have an adverse impact on the number of units. But if you don't know about that program, find out about it, talk about it. Housing trust funds, we did a workshop down in Fairfield County. Housing trust funds, Mansfield's got a particularly good one if you want to go look at it, and several other towns do as well. Take some money, lots of ways you can generate that money, put it in the bank, and then take it out to promote affordable housing in various ways. Tax increment financing gives the developer a break on taxes in return for the gains that come later when the development's done and generating future tax revenues. Tax abatements, I remember we did one in Bloomfield for a very large project close to the center of town, which brought a lot more people onto the street, met some housing needs. I think that developer got like an 8-year tax abatement. And if you get extra land, why not put it out to bid for the best developer to come along and build the most inclusive and affordable project that's possible? Make the land cheap or make it free. Next slide. And housing trust funds, if you don't know much about them, get onto your AI platform or whatever you use and learn about them. And if any of you got any questions, incidentally, I'm reachable. Call me, email me. I'm happy to spend my own time giving you some resources that you can follow up on. Next slide. All right, what do developers want? I've been saying this for decades. Developers want two things. Guess what they want? Guess what they want? Developers want two things: speed and certainty. If you give them those two things, they'll step up to the plate and begin to provide more of what you want. And so streamline permitting, particularly for affordable projects. Yes, you're going to have to hold some special meetings. Yes, you might have to hire some part-time special staff to move things along. But if you can streamline the process, you'll get a lot more out of your developer community. Waiver of impact and other fees that the town might require. Pre-approved plans, that's one of the secrets to ADUs. They do it in California, all over the place. They got a form book. I want ADU number 8. Well, if you pick ADU number 8, the plans are already there. They don't even have to review it. Just get a building permit for ADU number 8. You don't need an architect. Town's already approved it. But pre-approved plans of all types can be helpful. And land banking, land that you take back in tax foreclosures and so forth. Excess community land can go into these banks, which then can be used for affordable and more inclusive housing. Next slide. And there's something about streamlining. There's some example of actual from a town in California of variations on ADUs, which are as of right. I'll take a Studio Ranch, the one in the middle. Next slide. Modular prefabricated housing, some legislation pending in the General Assembly. You know, I think there's room here in our state, frankly, for single wide, 14-foot wide, 60 feet long. You know, it's a 750 square foot, more or less, home, 2 or 3 bedrooms in that, for a clustered, well-designed, well-landscaped ownership situation. But it's more than that. It's the double wides that are brought in as modulars and the like. We need to see how we can facilitate that with our regulations. Public-private partnerships. West Hartford's a good example where Blueback Square that I was involved in a couple of different respects. They made a deal with the town. We'll build a garage, you use your funding, you can park in it, we'll park in it, and so forth. You can leverage the low interest rates that government get in return for the developer doing something for the town. So consider private, public-private partnerships. Adaptive reuse. lots of activity in that area every day of conversion of buildings, and we now have some statutory provisions in Connecticut that allow conversions like of nursing homes. I got a question on that from a lawyer just yesterday about how to interpret that. Does every town have to have zoning that allows the conversion, even though the statutes say they have to be required? Anyway, infrastructure supports. You require the developers to put in the stormwater and the sewer and everything else. If you could get your public works department to do some of that work or pay for some of that work in return for the developer agreeing to provide more inclusive, more affordable housing, you could get some that way. Next slide. There's lots of church conversions, and there's an effort now of to get legislation to give churches the as of right permission to do affordable housing and other nonprofits. Next. Now, this is a big deal that I think people just do not recognize. NOAA, N-O-A-H. I didn't even know the term until a few years ago when I was sitting in an American College of Real Estate Lawyers lecture and they started talking about it. 75% of our country's affordable and unrestricted housing, not subject to covenants, but 75% of our affordable, unrestricted housing is NOAA, naturally occurring. It's the older, smaller houses, the 3-story, 4-story walk-ups, apartments owned by a few buildings owned by a couple of entrepreneurs who are taking care of them themselves. NOAA. We have no organized program in the state of Connecticut, and no local governments that I know in Connecticut, Chicago does, but not here in Connecticut, has any program to identify the naturally occurring affordable housing and protect it, save it. It's easier to save an affordable unit than to build a new one, and yet we're not saving it. So rental preservation ordinances, right of first refusal to tenants to buy out, recapitalizing through subsidies, rehab grants, naturally occurring affordable housing. Next slide, you'll see a graphic I made with AI. I love this. This shows what's happening. We're pouring in the top here new units, and it's killing us to get them done. And we're not getting it done, but that's what we're doing. We're just pouring in all the new units we can, which is the most expensive affordable housing, is to build it new, right? And out the bottom of that bucket, the title of the article I wrote on it was "There's a Hole in the Bucket, Dear Liza." You remember that song, that story? And so we're leaking out the bottom of the bucket all that affordable housing because we're not saving it, because we haven't identified it. We don't have a program to save it. So look in your communities, take a survey, and think what you can do. Tax abatements, there's a whole lot of things you could do in return for the owners of that affordable housing agreeing to keep it affordable. All right, getting in the home stretch. Got another survey coming here. Oh, there it is. All right, this is easy. Yes, no, or to heck with it. Do you have NOAA, now that I told you what it is, naturally occurring affordable housing in your community? Well, I think I know what the answer's got to be. Can I give them a hint? Beth, can you give hints here? I don't know. Okay. Yeah. Okay, what's the answer? Let's see if we've got 25 people getting in here. Oh, come on, 19? Well, yes. And I'll bet no. The people who answered and not sure, that's interesting. The people who said no, I'll bet you if you go back now and look, use the definition of, look up NOAA on the internet, and then start looking around in your towns. And I bet that number of yeses would go up and the number of no's would go down, because I don't know of a town in Connecticut that doesn't have NOAA. Next. Okay, you can do a lot for ownership of NOAA houses and other houses, such as and people getting in. It's really important in eliminating the racial disparity in intergenerational wealth, which hasn't changed since right after the Civil War, by getting ownership opportunities for people who've been routinely discriminated against in ownership. And some of that's providing down payments, sharing in the equity, educational programs to get ready people in financial planning and the like for ownership, and vouchers, such as the Section 8. Next. And some of them can be project specific. I'm not a fan of rent control or stabilization, but some people claim it's helpful. I would put it low on my list. We need a better job at eviction prevention and ombudsman for people who are in financial trouble, and a tenant opportunity to purchase buildings. We have that with mobile home parks, but we don't have that with some of our apartment buildings. Next. The 830G has a role to play, but if you look at the numbers, it's again, it's not the only solution. It's important to have, but the number of units produced is still quite small compared to what we need. Fair housing enforcement, we're not constrained by the Federal Fair Housing Act, which is good and helpful. We can go beyond that. At the local level, you can have a local fair housing law, and most towns don't, but you probably should. And then affordable housing plans, you have to have them, and that's important. Next. And we'll go into the home stretch here. Laws that preclude exclusionary zoning practices, our regional housing compacts through your COGS and otherwise. Data-driven planning, we need to assess better what our needs are so that we can target better for relieving that need and meeting it. And next slide. And I see a role for more smaller units, micro units, given the fact that we have much greater number of single family household, community land trust with land ownership. And if you're not familiar with community land trusts, I think Salisbury's got one of some note, that they can be helpful in keeping prices down. And obviously, we have a continuing problem, a terrible problem, with homelessness and an utter lack of permanent housing in most cases. And the last slide, I think, or next to last, faith-based development partnerships. We talked a little bit about that with religious institutions building. We're not spending enough money, time, and effort on getting more green building, because look at everybody's energy budgets, whether it's oil, gas, and the like. We got Beth makes a point here that Eastern Connecticut, there's the Southeast Connecticut Community Land Trust. Good to know. If you're not familiar with it, ask Beth. But we're doing not enough in terms of conservation, because it's a big part of folks' housing budgets. And then student and workforce housing models. Students outbid everybody in the single family neighborhoods. They always do. We need to target it by providing student specific housing. Next. I think we have one more. There we go. Okay. Which one do you think would help you? Micro units and some co-housing where people share? Local land trusts to have equity in the land, to reduce housing costs, faith-based developments with religious groups, building more energy efficient housing, dedicated student housing to keep the students from taking over our neighborhoods and forcing everybody out. I've done a lot of work in that area. It's really interesting, challenging. And dedicated workforce housing as well, or none of those. And the votes are coming in, and what do we have? Well, Tide micro units and energy efficient housing, community land trust. Uh, uh, I'm not surprised that this is the way it breaks out. Um, about 2/3 of the people saying we need most of this and not putting a lot of faith in faith-based developments. And um, it's important, but again, I don't think it's going to be a big contributor. Um, all right. Um, so I ran over by 4 minutes, but we still have about a half hour, right? So
We sure do. Can you hear me all right?
let's bring everybody back here. Beth, you were keeping an eye on questions or comments, right?
We were. One of the questions is easy, and that is, will this presentation be available? Yes, we are going to email out to all registrants both videos of the first evening and this evening. So we will be sharing that. We also have a question from Bud McAllister, if anyone has any experience with green building codes and the impact on housing.
I I I don't, not enough to make any suggestions. I will tell you one of the hot button issues, not exactly green, but is the second stairway issue. I don't know if you've been following that, wrestling with it in the state of Connecticut right now. I'm convinced from all the literature, and I've read a lot of it, that the single stairway approach is safe for people and would save us a lot of money, but that's not exactly green in that sense.
I don't have experience with building codes per se, but there are some green development practices that can be worked into zoning regs, particularly low impact development for drainage. And zoning doesn't really cover building codes so much, so I can't really speak for a building official. But there are some things you can put into your zoning regulations, your subdivision regulations that could be lower impact on the environment. Some of them get rather complicated, could be more expensive, but a lot of low impact development makes more sense. It tries to retain the water that's raining onto the land in that watershed, so it restores the groundwater. So many of those options are not that complicated, and they shouldn't be too expensive.
Any more questions?
Caroline, just one more. It's more an observation than a question, but I think it raises a question. Someone complimented Dwight on addressing naturally occurring affordable housing. Mentioned that the town of that the participant mentions it at the town, one of the towns in the Northeast region, but she has yet to see a plan to
Uh,
address naturally occurring affordable housing. Dwight, can you speak to some concepts of plans that you
yes,
may have
I
come
will, and
across?
I'll give you a paper I presented a year and a half ago to the American College of Real Estate Lawyers on it, that we can distribute to people to look at. It's a sort of like a book report. It's a summary of what other people are doing. Um, uh, it's astonishing to me. I called the State Department of Housing and all the housing people in Connecticut that I could talk to, and I said, "Do you have anything like this?" They say, not really. Got bits and pieces, but they don't pull it together." As I said, Chicago, and I had somebody on a panel with me in Denver uh, later this on the same subject from Chicago, who was great. They have a pretty good program, but the short version for the people that are with us this evening is make a plan to find out what you have. When I took my first as a college junior course in planning, I was so excited I discovered planning as a profession. And my professor said, planning is this simple. What do you have? What do you want? And how do you get it? So right now, I don't see any towns on the what do we have. Find out what your cheapest houses are, how old they are, what the history has been for scrape offs and McMansions, which was an epidemic a couple of decades ago, but still is not quite as bad, but it's still there. And once you know what's there, then maybe do a little survey of people as to what their problems are in having an affordable unit. Maintenance, taxes, our ad valorem tax rate in Connecticut is twice the national average in terms of its support of local education. Over 80% of local education comes from our ad valorem real property taxes. Other parts of the country, it's 40, and some places it's even less than that. I've thought about the idea of somebody's in an affordable small house, an older person, and you give them a tax abatement in return for their restricting their house from being scraped off. Let the market determine what the rent or the sale price is going to be. But you say to someone, we'll give you a tax abatement if you keep your house, enter into a restrictive agreement, a covenant for 10 years, 20 years, whatever you want, and we'll reduce your taxes by X. They can stay on. If they sell their house, whoever buys their house is going to be restricted to not scraping it off, not adding to it, making it more expensive. It's just part of that business of orchestrating. I got 50 ideas to pick from.
I wanted to add on to what you were saying.
Yeah.
I wrote a handful of affordable housing plans for towns in our region, and each one of them I have a detailed list of all the multifamily that exists in each of the towns. And I think a lot of the people who live in the town don't realize they have that many, because each of the towns do have quite a few multifamily. There's no high rises in the towns I did the plans for, but they have accessory dwelling units, duplexes, threeplexes. They have some larger apartment, I don't know if you want to call them complexes, because they're really not that huge, but they have them. And as long as, for instance, in Woodstock, I was the planner there for 19 years, the zoning officer for 12 of those years, I didn't hear any problems about them. So I think they get a bad rap, but I think it's unfair. I think they provide a great option. And in many cases, a lot of people in the community aren't even going to notice them enough to think about it, a year after they're built.
I think you both touch on something important, which is that communities need to understand the assets that they already have within their boundaries. And that's a challenge because I don't think many of them do. And even if the planners do, the decision makers might not, the public might not. Just kind of how would you recommend communities go about? There's so much energy behind new production, new construction of housing, but how do they sort of prioritize preservation of either NOAA housing or federally or state subsidized housing over new construction? How do they keep it in front of decision makers and the public as a priority?
Is that a question?
That's a question. Yeah. Somewhat
Anybody
rhetorical, but I'm asking you.
I think I've often toyed with I got 6 things going on in my head here. So number one is that I remember years ago, a study on Long Island showed that half of the units were illegal. And we had people die in New York City in that flood 3 years ago from basement apartments that were illegal. We have a lot of illegal apartments, a lot. And we don't have enough zoning enforcement officers to go and find them all. I'm really concerned about life safety. And our regulatory programs ought to promote life safety as an objective. And one way to do that is to regularize these single room rentals in houses. Now, there's legislation pending in the state that would mandate it. Pro Homes Connecticut is supporting it, and they're mandating renting rooms. I think that's a pretty good idea, but you don't have to wait for the state to decide it. We could do it at the local level. And in fact, when I wrote as a pro bono project for one of your Northeast Connecticut Council of Governments municipalities, ADU regulations, we wrote them to provide that a room inside an existing house with or without a kitchen could be an as of right ADU. Why not? Somebody with a hot plate and a dormitory refrigerator could be perfectly happy renting a room in somebody's house. Our definition of family, that's the first thing every town ought to go back and look at, is our definition of family making people violate the law because they have people in there not related by blood, marriage, or adoption, and not more than two or three people. You don't need that definition to protect so-called single-family values because households are not the same as they were 50 years ago.
Right.
So look at the definition of family and figure out a way that you could legalize or regularize those illegal units which are in your town now by changing the regulations, allowing a certain number, having a forum at which people come and talk about it, and also talk about things like insurance and rental agreements, help the homeowner be able to rent rooms to people who need those rooms. And that's a good start. Now, in terms of answering your NOAA question, again, it's a matter of survey, asking people what they need, how could they be helped, and then establishing a program to do that.
And I think for decision, this isn't a question, this is just my opinion as a planner, is that what can drive it home for decision makers is that there's economic value in those NOAA units to the community as a whole. This isn't fresh money you have to put out for a subsidy. These are things that are already existing, and that has value, and making that clear.
Yeah. I want to add to that too, coming from the work that I do with the homeless population, that idea of taking a look at the NOAA homes. We saw a huge spike in landlords, like small mom and pop landlords that had always had affordable apartments for the population. That we served after the pandemic. They sold a lot of their units to these big out-of-state corporations. And, they came in and refurbished the units and jacked up the rent so that now they are not affordable. And of course, they're mainly absentee landlords now. So I wish we had this conversation a few years ago to take a look at this, because it sounds like a great idea. To maintain the stock that we have here in Eastern Connecticut for affordability.
I have a question. It's not really meant to, or I don't really expect an answer tonight, but for the towns where you hear concerns about impact on property values, we always hear that. But we hear an awful lot about how we have more and more 1 and 2 person households. And so a single person typically has a single income, so they're going to have less purchasing power. And even if, say, an older person moves out of their huge house into live with family, nursing home, whatever, anyway, they sell their large home, it doesn't mean those homes now become available to the single person because they may not be able to afford the huge house. So if we have a growing number of very small households, and what we have is a housing stock of very large households, what is that going to do long term to our property values? There's going to be demand for something that you don't have, and little demand for what you do have. So I think that they may affect your property value. If you think you're trying to preserve your property value, but you're not responding to how households are changing, you may actually not be doing your town any favors.
I'm curious, Dwight, also, how would you get the towns to buy into like tax breaks for NOAA properties? Because we've had these discussions kind of locally, and thrown out there, maybe giving tax breaks to landlords to rent to lower income, in keeping the rent down, and the towns have not really wanted to have those conversations.
Well, I think There's a technique called a reverse auction. A reverse auction is the winner is the one who bids the lowest. Okay. I've used it in some writing on theories of eliminating restrictive covenants that preclude affordable housing. But imagine you had a situation where a municipality said, we want to preserve this NOAA housing, and we know that they're struggling because our taxes are high. And our tax system is based on fair market value of the houses, the buildings, the 3-story walk-up, whatever it is, and not on the fact that some of the units are affordable or they're run by a small-time entrepreneur who only owns 2 or 3 buildings. So you set up some criteria that says, we're going to provide a tax abatement to landlords who directly or indirectly don't own more than X. So they're the smaller people that need the most help. And they will make an application of what the current unit rent is, and what they're willing to agree to restrict the rent for the period of the tax abatement. Okay? And the town has set aside X number of dollars. They're not real dollars. The beauty of the tax abatement is they don't have to allocate the money. They're just not getting the money that they would otherwise get. And then they say to these landlords, we've got a fund of, we'll give up to 8 years of tax abatement and so many dollars a year if you will agree to restrict your units to 80% or 60% or whatever. And the one who bids the lowest wins the abatement. All right. So that's a reverse auction. So they'll have a fund, they'll be competing against each other, and you'd have a process to review their applications for the tax abatements. And in return, they'd enter into an agreement that they won't rent their apartments for more than X number of dollars in accordance with their plan for the term of the tax abatement. And you're going to find the person who's going to be most benefited by that's the one that's going to bid the lowest, and you're going to keep that property in a small entrepreneur, a local person usually, or somebody nearby who's not a big corporation buying up all the buildings, which is what you're reflecting on, has been a problem. It sounds like it's a lot of infrastructure to do that, but it's not. And so that's the way I would probably approach it if they want to start it. It doesn't have to be a big program. It could be, $50,000, $100,000 worth of tax abatements spread over several properties, and then you get to see who really needs it, because they'll come out and they'll say, we need it. I'm willing to keep my apartment at $750 a month for the next 5 years, or $750 plus 3% a year, or whatever they agree to, if you'll give me an abatement of X number of dollars on my taxes.
We have one more audience question that I think we should get to, and I think we'll have time to. This question is, our town, like many towns, is working on the new POCD. One section identifies housing as built before a certain day in a way that seems to make those older homes, quote, less than those built more recently. How do we value those NOAA homes? So that'll be our last question. Dwight, Delia?
Oh, come on. Too much.
I'm not sure what you mean by value them as less than. I've written a handful of POCDs, and I haven't put anything in there about valuing them less. I'm not sure what you mean.
Maybe it's in terms of priority is the way I read the question, that we seem to prioritize newer construction housing versus aged housing stock.
Our town's working.
Prioritize it in terms of allowing it to be used or something. If typically what I see is the regulations are all about new construction. So if you don't have regulations that allow for reusing something that's already built, then you may see less of that, because if the house is not conforming in some way it may be harder to get approval to do something with it, where it's easy to just buy another lot, build something that conforms to the current standards. That's why you often see more new construction than you see reusing. All regulations typically are designed for new construction. They're not about reusing. That's why it can be so, I mean, one of the reasons why it can be so difficult to redevelop a brownfield. I mean, aside from the contamination issues, regulations aren't really about how do you retrofit something that was built at a time, most likely when you didn't have zoning. You know, the old mill buildings and stuff, they were built at a time that is most likely predates zoning by many decades. So you can't shoehorn that into current setbacks and standards when because their buildings are typically so huge, you would need a whole new set of regulations. I mean, those are often really slow to come by.
Yeah, but I think also that communities, they know that with new construction, they know how to act. They know they can regulate, they know they can, use form and create different designs. They're only just sort of going into that sphere of understanding they can make things smaller, they can make things denser, but they haven't really thought through or even recognized that NOAA and subsidized affordable housing is within their sphere. So the sort of the taxation approach that Dwight just discussed is, I think, would be really interesting to a lot of communities. And I think if we can push forward some of those ideas, I think maybe some communities might embrace it and also ask more questions and want to hear more. It's just a matter of the learning curve.
Well, the housing trust funds give you some flexibility in being able to do that. And, I think one of our problems is that we're tied up in knots over 830G's requirements. And not everything's an 80% or 60% or 40 years or new construction. I mean, I think there's a role to play. First of all, as I said, the Kent example is a good one where a community-minded citizen is put his own money up to make something happen, and the community's gathered around him and said, we should do this and we support you. And they changed the regulations to allow it. And now they're going to get some affordable units. It doesn't really match 830G, but it's got an affordability plan, and there will be affordable units, and they will be preserved for decades. But new construction is the most expensive thing to do. I would like to see some inclusionary zoning that says to developers, you get more density, we're going to fast track, we'll give you infrastructure, we'll give you tax abatement, and you don't have to build those affordable units here. Go to those NOAA units and tie them up with a restrictive easement on them. Or go do a dense double wide clustered subdivision with top-notch site design and landscaping, and we'll give you credit for that towards your market rate units over here. Now, two things. We want people to be economically integrated because it makes for stronger communities. So you have to think about that. You have to think about 4-bedroom units, which we don't build enough of in enough places for those families that are large. And finally, we need to get off the rental train and get on the ownership train if we're going to close that black-white racial intergenerational wealth gap, which, as I said, is as bad today as it was in 1960 and the late 1860s. We're not making any progress on economic equity. Until we have economic equity, it's going to be a continuing struggle to get racial equity. So we need to figure out how to help people achieve intergenerational wealth they're not otherwise getting.
Thank you. I mean, with that, I'm not sure that we can end this series on a better note than talking about equity. So thank you, Delia and Dwight, for grounding us in what action can look like. And thank you to Don and Jamie for helping launch this conversation 2 weeks ago. And thank you to everyone that's joined us, whether you were here 2 weeks ago or tonight or both. Over these evenings, we've not just talked about housing, we've started to build a shared understanding of what's happening across Eastern Connecticut and what it will take to move us forward. Housing can be a challenging topic, especially in small towns that define so much of our region. But what these conversations show is that communities are ready to engage thoughtfully, practically, and with a clear sense of what's at stake. At CHOEC, we believe that strong communities depend on having housing options to allow people to stay, to contribute, and to be part of the places they care about. Our role doesn't end here, and neither does this conversation. After tonight, we'll be sharing recordings from both evenings, along with a short survey. We'll also be providing a link tree with resources. All of our contact information was in the chat, but you will receive that as well. Feel free to reach out to any of the experts that have been part of this panel. We hope what we've started over these last 2 nights continues in your towns, in your meetings, and in your day-to-day work. Because real progress happens locally, and it happens when people stay engaged. Because in the end, housing isn't just about buildings or policies. It's about whether our communities remain places where people can live, work, and truly belong. Again, thank you to our speakers, Don Poland, Jamie Parker, Delia Fay, and Dwight Merriman. And thank you for joining us this evening. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.